With their first attempt at taking the world and creatures of Dragon Quest and expanding their previous monster taming mechanics into a full-blown game, Enix was onto a winning formula. One full of dragons, golems, and killer apples. And like any winning formula worth its salt, the sequel doubled down on the profits and was split into 2 versions. But still, Enix delivered the goods once again, by making everything bigger and mostly better. Kobe's Journey and Terra's Adventure were released in March of 2001 for the Game Boy Color, and while the mechanics have remained more or less the same, the structure of the story is totally different. Dragon Quest Monsters was a spin-off from Dragon Quest VI, featuring a younger version of Terry, an important character from that game. Dragon Quest Monsters 2 instead has a completely original story. In Kobe's Journey, you play as Kobe, the older brother, while in Terra's Adventure you play Terra, the younger sister. The sibling you don't play as will then provide some exposition during the story. Dragon Quest Monsters 2 begins with the siblings and their family sailing towards a brand new farm life in the kingdom of Great Log. Yes, those assholes. After getting settled in their new home, your father asks you to go do something productive with your life, and mommy entrusts you with picking up a pie at the local vault. On the way there, however, Prince Kameha and his little butt buddy are going around town being absolute wankers, and on the way back they smell something delicious and will block your path home. This results in a kerfuffle that ends with the pie flying into a nearby well. Inside, the 2 bastards are wrestling with each other for that bundle of sweetness, and as your sibling attempts to stop them, Kameha accidentally destroys the island's plug. Yeah, as it turns out, Great Log is basically an inflatable, and if that hole is left unpenetrated for too long, the island's life force will be released and eventually doom everyone to a watery grave. In a rare display of a heart of gold and a soul of silver, Warubo screws itself deep into the hole, temporarily averting a disaster. He asks you to go find a monster master to help, but of course nobody else believes that the island is about to do a Titanic. There's no other choice. You will be the monster master who will save Great Log from a tragic end. Whether these people are worth saving is another question entirely, but anyway, you will do this by using special magic keys on the magical door in the next magical room. These keys allow you to access many different worlds, each with their own dragons, golems, and plot twists. And this is where the game diverges from Monsters 1, which had a central hub with portals that would take you to randomly generated dungeons with a set number of floors. The story of Monsters 2 instead features 5 worlds with their own self-contained story, characters, and locations. The first is the desert world, a place with a lot of desert, but later you find new keys that transport you to new worlds with new problems to solve and new monsters to find. After the credits roll, you can find a couple more unique keys, but the main draw is the randomized ones, which you can acquire from the arena or from NPC masters. Once you get them appraised, they will take you to many amazing worlds, such as Blue Magma, Gaudy Bug, and Yellow Water? The way they're set up is quite simple. The first half of the name determines the world's rarity, influencing the monsters that show up, and the second half determines which families of monsters will appear. These worlds are divided into multiple areas, with various dungeons and towns scattered through them. The dungeons themselves are very close to the randomized dungeons of Monsters 1, and at the end is a chest that awards you a rare item. The towns, on the other hand, only have a limited number of fixed layouts, not all of which have all facilities available. Areas also have an area boss that must be defeated before you can recruit any monsters in that specific area. And somewhere in the world lies a world boss that will let you recruit monsters anywhere in that world. The area boss rooms contain portals to the next area, but if you want, you can just head straight for the world boss by crossing the sea or the sky, with the map abilities you gain during the story. It goes without saying that these don't compare to the handcrafted worlds. There's no story or unique events. All they are doing is recontextualizing the randomization into something a bit more natural than a nonsensical blend of terrains. But I appreciate the effort, and I'd love to see this idea expanded further, with randomly generated quests and storylines to give it more purpose. So how does it play? Well, practically identical to the first game, and that's a good thing. The number of monsters has grown to 312, with the water family being the biggest addition. Monsters 2 also adds equipable accessories, granting your monsters various bonuses. Other notable changes include the player moving faster and monsters no longer recovering MP by simply walking around. The arena is almost entirely optional now, and once you beat the S-class, you can repeat each one as many times as you want, which is a good source of magic keys. The core combat mechanics have barely changed. Once again, you control a party of 3 monsters with their own stats and skills. Strength and defense influence how much physical damage they deal and take. Agility determines turn order, and intelligence is required to learn skills. The last stat is wild, which indicates how much the monster is willing to obey you. This can be lowered by simply having them in your party, or by feeding them meat, and you want this at 0 so that they will always follow your plan. This is because combat is built around letting your monsters think for themselves. You can command your party directly, but the idea is to use plans and personalities to get the results you want. Personalities are randomly selected when you acquire the monster, but can be changed through certain items or by repeatedly using certain plans. These can be chosen every turn. Charge goes all out on offense, with no regard for MP usage. Mixed offers a more tactical approach, using support skills. Cautious focuses on survival, defending and using healing skills when necessary. Arena battles are slightly different in that you can still select the plans, but you can't tell monsters exactly what to do. Instead, you have a 4th plan that simply tells monsters to not spend any MP. Having the AI take control seems like a Chernobyl waiting to happen, but it actually works pretty well, and because the plans you choose in battle also loop back and modify personalities, your monsters' actions will be predictable and reliable. It's not perfect, but situations where you need a monster to cast a healing spell and they decide to just go beat their head on a wall instead are quite rare. Only the arena's first 2 classes are required to progress the story now, so that's also even less of a problem than it was in the previous game. Speaking of which, the story is significantly easier than the first game, and that's mostly down to its structure and monster variety. There are a couple of difficulty spikes, and the arena continues to be the pain that it always was, but the difficulty curve is smoother, and the magic keys open up the literal door to whole new worlds of possibilities. This leads me to the best part of the game, the breeding. But before that, you need to actually have more than one monster, so go beat the living hell out of some wild monsters and hope for the best. You can also give them meat, which increases the chances of recruiting them. Once you've got a robust set of guinea pigs that are level 10 or higher, you first select a base monster and then a partner of the opposite sex. The parents will be lost forever, but out of it comes an egg which will hatch into a monster that inherits their abilities. The resulting offspring is determined by the monster family of the parents, and crossing one family with another will result in an offspring of the same family as the base monster. For example, if you cross a beast with a bird, you get a beast monster, but if you instead select that bird as the base and breed it with the beast, the resulting offspring will be of the bird family. The general rule is that the individual species don't matter, only the families. But of course, many unique combinations do exist, and combined with the magic key system, you have more options than ever. The game now also shows you the result before you select the parents, which is pretty helpful. It's a lot like the Megami Tensei series if you've played that, just without the part about summoning a giant penis monster. What the breeding system means for the gameplay is complete freedom, letting any monster reach max stats and learn any skill. You see, unbred monsters only learn 3 skills, but bred monsters will inherit whatever skills the parents knew when they reach the required level and intelligence. The only limit is that a monster can only have 8 skills at once, so you'll have to replace existing ones. The point is, if you want a monster to know a particular set of skills, you can continuously breed different monsters with the skills you want until you have the perfect combination. It can be dragons, it can be golems, it can be rats. The sky is the limit. A quarter of the sum of the parents' stats also gets passed down to the offspring, so the more powerful each parent is, the more powerful the offspring will be at level 1, potentially surpassing an unbred monster several levels higher. The higher the level of the parents, the higher the plus bonus will also be, increasing the max level that the offspring can reach. The downside of this system is the exact same as Monsters 1, that is, the classic dilemma of freedom versus individuality. The mechanics are super fun and engaging, but ultimately your party is just a bunch of numbers with different sprites attached to them, and the best strategy is to simply pack a ton of MP and damage skills on all your monsters. To be fair, the world structure of Monsters 2 means that high MP is less important, since you can easily go back to towns for healing. And I'm not saying that there are no differences between each individual monster. They have different XP requirements and different growth rates for each stat, and some have resistances to various attack types. But due to how stats get passed down to the offspring, teaching them the right skills is easily the most important part. And yes, there are special monsters with very high stat growth, but they level up so slowly that by the point it starts mattering, you've already beaten the game down to a digital pulp. Personalities also continue to be something you don't really need to pay attention to. In practice, plans are all you have to keep in mind, and since plans themselves can change the monster's personality with enough time, it all loops back into plans being the most important thing. It's the same with the wild stat, which in practice is never a problem if you're constantly breeding monsters, because newborns start with 0 wild. It also increases much more slowly this time, so if you want to swap around monsters, the penalty is insignificant. And of course, there's that stupid elephant in the room. The key difference between Kobe's adventure and Tara's journey is that some wild monsters and a couple of unique keys are different. The exclusive keys have to be traded, but the monsters can all be found on both games, thanks to breeding and the randomized magic key system. A few other minor differences exist, like this part in Sky World where Tara can squeeze through a hole, while Kobe is a fat ass who needs to transform into a monster, but otherwise the split is pointless. I guess that the story does also feel a bit underwhelming compared to the first game. The worlds are quite small and their stories don't last long enough for you to really get attached to them, and the final world with the big climax is just 2 boss battles. Monsters 1 might have a very basic structure, but it ended with a big bang, while the conclusion to Monster 2's story feels rather flaccid. Great Wog itself also isn't as interesting as Great Tree was, which evolved quite a bit as the story progressed and opened up new secrets. Great Wog does change, but not to the same degree, and there just aren't many secrets to discover. But besides that, I just have some nitpicks, like the map abilities being obnoxiously slow, or how the randomly generated dungeons don't have a map like in Monsters 1, so backtracking can be a pain. But thankfully you can buy exit bells and use them to leave the dungeon whenever you want. Yeah, you can tell that I'm desperately reaching for things to complain about. The reality is that Dragon Quest Monsters 2 is easily one of the best games on the Game Boy Color, and another shining example of how to design a monster taming RPG. The monster designs are great, and the gameplay is simple enough for newcomers to learn, while also featuring enough depth for experts to sink their teeth into. The combat and breeding mechanics are immensely addicting, and really sparkle my tingly bits like an unplanned ASMR session. And I guess that, just like with Monsters 1, Enix also thought the same, since just like with Monsters 1, they went on to remake them. Twice. Just like with Monsters 1. Dragon Quest Monsters 1 and 2 is a remake of both games released for the Sony PlayStation, and they include updated graphics and sound, some new content, and mostly the same gameplay mechanics. But unlike with Monsters 1, there were 2 games to remake. So what elegant solution did the developers find for this predicament? Well, it just has both games separately. This remake is primarily a facelift, but there are some changes to the story. It plays into the comedy angle a bit more, and has a few new scenes that develop the plot further or alters some details. Kameha and Warubo continue being giant doofuses, but the search for a monster master has been substituted with the siblings looking for something to insert in the hole. They sneak a face out of the farm, but of course it doesn't work, otherwise there would be no game after all. A notable inclusion is this jerk. In the original game, you had a generic NPC doing the bidding of the main villain, but here this guy takes their place and serves as the antagonist throughout most of the story, with a bigger presence, rather than some literal who that shows up 3 times in total. But a handful of story moments were also removed, namely the subplot involving a queen having nightmares and you having to get some weed to fix it, and also the unique keys found after the credits. The layout of some places received changes too, with Great Wog being the most obvious one, now featuring bridges and stone structures instead of ground. It feels a lot bigger now. Which is ironic, because if you thought the worlds felt small in the original games, now they make a Big Mac look gargantuan. And I wonder if the slower movement speed was a deliberate choice to make them seem bigger than they actually are. On the bright side, the game isn't divided into screens anymore, which is reason enough to choose this remake over the original game. You have a few other minor improvements too, such as a command to cast spells until the party is fully healed, or that direct command thing I mentioned last time, 3 years ago. Basically, instead of selecting the exact commands through the plan menu, you can make it play more like the standard Dragon Quest games. It's a really simple thing, but hey, it's cool. Besides that, it plays pretty much the same as the originals. You still have a party of 3 monsters, you still have the breeding mechanics to create overpowered abominations, and you still have the magic keys, which function mostly the same but did get some appreciated upgrades. The maps are now fully exposed from the start, and the various locations you visit now feel like proper places that someone would live in. Instead of basic square rooms, the bosses now have fancy castles and stuff, and towns now actually have houses, which in retrospect was an odd omission. Also, remember how I said it would be cool to have randomized stories? Well, some worlds do have characters that tell you how the world boss is a cunt, and then after you defeat it, they thank you for helping them. It's a minor detail, but it's a step in the right direction. The main story's difficulty did get nerfed quite a bit, however. Certain boss battles that were previously a difficulty spike are now a piece of cake, like how the dead captain is now alone rather than being joined by two boners. I also noticed that some specific attacks that used to hurt like hell now are quite pathetic, to put it lightly, while others remain as painful as always. I'm not sure what's that about. That doesn't mean that the difficulty curve is better though. The first 3 worlds are a joke, aside from one boss at the end of the Ice World. Then the Sky World is a big jump in difficulty, but still pretty manageable. And then you get to Limbo and suddenly every random encounter is like a boss battle. So instead of having an occasional difficulty spike, it's like you have a difficulty cliff at the end. There's also some weird design choices, like removing the original boss music and simply playing the regular one on most boss battles, but then having a totally new track for a handful of them. Though there's also a unique final boss theme, which is nice. The graphics are also simple, but they're fine, aside from how you have to get so microscopically close to characters to talk to them. As for that whole trading and battling monsters with other people thing, you might be aware that the PlayStation doesn't exactly have a link cable. So here's how they tried to handle it. They didn't. Okay, that's not totally fair. Battles can be had against the monsters in any of your save files, both Monsters 1 and 2, and then you can either play with yourself or lend a second controller to someone else. The thing is, the PlayStation had 2 memory card slots, so there's the possibility that someone else could bring their own memory card to battle you. This extends to breeding, which can be done with any save file that has cleared the game. It can be one of your own, but you can also breed with someone else by swapping memory cards. This is pretty cool, but limiting it to after beating the story seems like a bit of a waste. Though I do understand that without some limitations, you could play through one of the games and then tear the other ones to pieces by breeding super powerful monsters at the start of the game. And speaking of connections, this game had some sort of connectivity with some old mobile phone games in Japan, and unfortunately what little chance anyone still has of testing it is slowly fading away, since the iMode store was shut down a while ago. The service will continue until 2026, however. Either way, that's Dragon Quest Monsters 1 and 2. I'm biased towards the original Game Boy games, but despite a few quirks, it's a decent remake and a perfectly good way to play Monsters 2 with its classic mechanics. Shame about that translation. The second remake though, that might as well be a brand new game. Just like its predecessor, Monsters 2 got its own complete overhaul, and like its predecessor, this remake was released exclusively in Japan. And like its predecessor, it got a complete fan translation. For consistency's sake, this translation uses the official English names for the protagonists, but everything else was updated to the terms seen in the series' modern localizations. So you get monsters with deliciously punny names, and instead of firebanes and explodeds, you get Frizz, Frizzle, Kafrizz, Kafrizzle, Kerfrizz, Sis, Sizzle, Cassis, Cassissle, Whoosh, Swoosh, Caswoosh, Caswooshle, Swooshmorta, Crack, Crackle, Kercrack, Kacrack, Kacrackle, Frizzcracker, Bang, Boom, Kaboom, Kaboomal, Bangmurta, Zap, Zapple, Kazap, Kazapple, Kazapstrophe, Zem, Zammel, Kazam, Kazamel, Whack, Thwack, Kathwack, Kamikaze. The game begins with selecting the player character and also creating a monster partner, or Montner for short. I'll cover that in a bit. Once you're done, you get a cutscene of a dragon being chased around by monsters. The dragon dives below the clouds, and the scene then shifts to a more familiar sight, with the siblings and their friends and family heading for Great Log. After arriving, your father tells you to get accustomed to the farm while he goes thank the king for this farmland. And right away the story diverges, as your sibling suggests checking out a nearby path. It's here that the game teaches you the basics of the gameplay, together with a trustworthy level 1 slime. At the end of the path is a cave, and through a crevice appears a big scary monster. It's that dragon from before who was carrying an egg. Its own egg, in fact, and it dumps it on you before running away from the monsters chasing it. Moments later, the egg hatches and out comes your Montner, who instantly dotes up on you and by the next day is already well acquainted with the farm. From here it's pretty much the same as the PlayStation version, with 2 dicks and a hole being left unpenetrated. And yes, the evil guy shows up too, and I won't spoil them, but you can also expect some interesting curveballs during the story, so if you were expecting a copy-pasted script, well, there you go. This remake dips its toes into reimagining territory, with a familiar yet very fresh adventure full of dragons, golems, and killer pineapples that better stay the hell away from my pizza. The changes go far beyond just story or visuals, because the very basics of exploring the world are different. The most obvious change is that you no longer have random encounters, and instead you have monsters roaming the world and doing their thing. And yes, if you approach them from behind, you get a free turn in battle. You can also perform different actions, which can catch their attention or even scare them. But most of all, it's just great to see monsters interact with the environment and with one another. Yeah, some of them just spawn at random and do nothing except walk a few steps, but it's nice to see monsters display so much character in the wild, rather than just aimlessly wandering around. I know a franchise that could learn from this. The worlds themselves are also structured in a completely different manner, with mountains and obstacles being represented by actual geometry rather than simple tiles, which just wasn't possible in a flat 2D perspective. It's still many of the same locations, it's just that this is now this. Back when I covered Monsters 1, I was stuck with a toaster that couldn't render its way out of a polygon bag, but now that I have a PC that can emulate 3DS games at increasingly pointless resolutions, it's very obvious that the distinctive style of the Dragon Quest series is finally properly represented with all of its exaggerated faces and gaping mouths. Similarly, the combat mechanics are familiar yet different in a number of ways. Not only does the game feature a very different selection of monsters, but the mechanics were updated to match the Joker games, resulting in the overall balance being drastically different. The new party system has 4 slots for active monsters and 4 standby slots that can be swapped in and out during combat. The wild stat and the personality mechanic have also been completely removed, and instead you have traits that provide passive bonuses. Accessories have been replaced with weapons, which not only boost attack power, but can alter the properties of the monster's basic attack. Monsters now also learn skill sets that teach them individual skills, or abilities as they are called in the translation. As they level up, monsters gain skill points, and by spending enough on their skill sets, they will progressively unlock more of its abilities. As you might have guessed, breeding passes down skill sets rather than individual skills, and the offspring also inherits a portion of the parents' skill points. Monsters now also have different size classes. Most only occupy 1 slot, but some will take 2, 3 or even 4 slots. In exchange, they can also know more skill sets and traits, their stats and the damage they inflict get a large bonus, and they have a chance of attacking multiple times per turn. As for your Montner, it mostly functions like a regular monster, but it also has a few unique quirks, and its appearance is customizable. First, you pick one of the available body types, as well as one of the appearance presets. From there, you can pick a body part for its body, and also its arms, legs, and back. If you want a particularly ugly abomination, each body part can also be a different color. Once you're done molesting Mother Nature, you pick a gender and then a personality, which has nothing to do with the original game's personality mechanic and simply determines the Montner's stat growth. Another quirk involves the breeding mechanics. These are still based around picking a male and a female monster, but one very appreciated change is how you can simply pick the offspring rather than it being determined by the base monster. There's also only 7 monster families now, but rest assured there's a truckload of options here, and most breeding combinations will give you 2 or 3 options. The scouting system also makes getting the monsters you want so much easier and effectively removes 90% of the frustration factor. During your turn, your monsters can scout a particular enemy, which involves beating them to a pulp until the peer pressure convinces them to join your army. The more powerful your monsters, the higher the chance that the target will accept. Failure will result in the enemy party getting a free turn against you, but if you're facing weaker ones, it's practically assured that you will successfully recruit that monster, and the fact that monsters now roam the overworld means that you can deliberately search for a specific monster rather than it being entirely left to luck. Your Montner can also breed, but the offspring will always be itself. It gives birth to itself. The point is, you also want to breed your Montner in order to improve its stats and abilities. The plus numbers are one way to do so, since they now add other bonuses, such as increasing the number of traits and increasing the monster's rank, which, yeah, that's a thing now. And this is where things can get a bit controversial. Remember how I said that the original game's mechanics gave you all the freedom in exchange for each monster's individuality? Well, the remake drifts a bit towards the other side. Previously, any monster could reach the stat limit of 999, but now each species has its own limits for each stat, and naturally higher rank monsters tend to have higher limits and superior stats overall. The skill sets also somewhat restrict the variety of skills that monsters can learn at once. You can no longer teach exactly what individual skills you want, you're limited by the ones available in each skill set. Most of them are specialized in a specific type of ability, and while monsters can learn more than 8 skills, they can only learn a small number of skill sets. I don't think these mechanics are necessarily better or worse than the old ones, they're just different. You can still beat the story without going full competitive tryhard, and there are ways to increase a monster's rank and overall power, and there's a bunch of new breeding mechanics that you unlock after the credits. The game certainly doesn't force you to use specific monsters. I'm just saying that you will have an easier time with specific monsters. Now let's talk magic keys, which have been changed quite a bit. As you progress in the game and reach certain milestones, you unlock various titles, and once you complete the main story, you can mix these titles to create your own keys. And much like the original game's naming system, the titles determine what monsters will appear. Magic keys have 2 modes, quest and exploration. Exploration simply lets you wander around the world for 15 minutes, while quest gives you a task. Completing that task will award you some goodies and will level up the key, making the monsters in that world stronger. Unfortunately, there are a couple of problems that kind of ruin the system, one of them being how most of the functionality is locked until after clearing the story. Another one is that the worlds are not randomly generated, and most simply recycle sections of the story worlds. All that changes is stuff like towns being blocked by obstacles and different monsters spawning on the overworld. On top of that, you can't go too far because you only get 15 minutes each trip, and after that you have to pay a hefty fee to recharge them instantly or wait real time until they recharge, which from what I've read can range from 30 minutes to 22 friggin' hours. And sure, there's some new story elements after the credits, but once you're done with those, the endgame is either going online and fighting other players, or digging around with magic keys that don't have anything to explore to begin with. It's a bizarre situation because Terry's Wonderland 3D did have some randomization, so at the very least they could have recycled that system. Seems like a bit of a cock-up for a game with keys in the title. And speaking of cock-ups, the balance of higher tier magic is completely friggin' stupid, and can result in the players screwing themselves over by investing too many points into certain skill sets, and being forced to micromanage monsters every turn to avoid wasting precious MP. Most magic is fine, but then you start raising an eyebrow at things like mid-heal costing 22 MP instead of the basic heal's 4 MP, and then mega heal jumps to a whopping 90 MP. All you need is a monster with the health professional trait, and the basic heal spell will cover you for the entire story, because magic scales with intelligence, and herbs are dirt cheap and you can carry hundreds of them. But offensive magic is the worst offender. The lower tiers seem well balanced given their damage output and MP consumption, but the highest tiers cost around 60 MP, which leaves you wondering why you would ever use them unless you screw up like I did, because the higher tiers automatically replace the lower ones, and I ended up with a monster that could use them twice before running out of MP. This remake is already much harder by itself, but maximum MP values are also significantly lower than they were before, so there was no need to make the strongest spells borderline useless by giving them such disproportionately high costs. Yes, there are skills that lower MP consumption, but then you're basically forced to have specific skill sets just so that these particular skills make sense to use. Besides that, I just have some minor complaints about movement and the interface. The fully 3D environments are nice, but this is one of those games that are really picky about where you go. So if there's even the tiniest ledge, you'll probably have to walk around it instead of just dropping down. The status panel is also a bit of a mess that spans 5 screens, and all the terminology can seem really confusing at first. This is especially true because there's no way to quickly check what any of them mean. You have to open the archive and search for that particular term, which is slow and annoying. There's also no way to see how much MP each skill costs outside of checking the menu in battle, which is a really dumb oversight. Sure would be a shame if certain skills cost a gazillion MP, wouldn't it? There's also an option to make battles go 3 times as fast, but for some reason it's locked until you complete the main story. Thankfully, the battle interface is perfectly fine. Hell, the rest of the game is fine. Super fine. And it's a real shame that this game didn't get released outside of Japan. Though it did get ported to iOS, and apparently it did receive a few meaningful changes. But you'll have to check that out for yourself, and without a translation of course. Overall, I have no problem recommending this remake together with the original game. Both are sufficiently different from one another that it's worth checking out both. The PlayStation remake is also fine, but it plays very similarly to the original, so it's interchangeable. But whichever way you go, one thing will never change. Like its predecessor, Dragon Quest Monsters 2 is one of the all-time greats of the monster taming genre.